Hello and welcome to this video, this webcast on the Level 5 Diploma in Sales and Marketing Management. Today we're going to go through one of the learning outcomes of Unit 503, Sales Forecasts and Target Setting. This unit has got 4 learning outcomes within it. There's another video online already covering Learning Outcome 1, and Learning Outcomes 3 and 4 will be launched very, very soon. In this area we're going to cover Learning Outcome 2, Understanding Forecasting in Your Own Organisation. If you haven't already been through Learning Outcome 1, it really is worthwhile going and having a look at that video first before going through this one, because the assignment at the end of this learning outcome actually requires you to cover the materials for both Learning Outcome 1 and Learning Outcome 2 together. So you do need to look at both of these in conjunction to be able to fulfill the requirements of the assignment for this learning outcome. So we're going to look now in a bit more detail at understanding forecasting in your own organisation, how you go about getting under the skin of what goes on in your company, in your organisation, for creating forecasts and most importantly using them and then reporting on them afterwards. So, Learning Outcome 2, Sales Forecasts and Target Setting. Within the learning outcome, there are actually 7 different areas that we need to go through. So we'll go through these reasonably briefly now. The first step is to evaluate your own available sales information. Depending on the industry, the sector in which you operate, you will have wildly different sets of sales information available to you. Some organisations literally know what they sell on a monthly basis or maybe even a quarterly basis as things are totted up. Other industries have fantastic data that actually enables them to track what's selling to whom, when, on a minute-by-minute basis for every single different item that they produce or sell or manufacture, and your organisation may sit somewhere between those extremes or may actually be at one of the extremes. So it's important to understand what you have available within your organisation. Learning Outcome 2.2, look at other information from within your organisation that can help you to create your sales forecast. We went through a lot of that material in Learning Outcome 1, but we're going to touch on that again just to see whether there's anything that we missed. Learning Outcome 2.3, look about plans for product and service development and see how that would actually impact on sales forecasts. Again, when we looked in Learning Outcome 1 at the forecast for the future, we said, well, actually, we need to get as much information internally as we can. Here we're actually saying, well, what are the plans for particular products and brands and services? What are we deciding to do about it? And how do we need to overlay that on top of the base forecast that is in place for a particular product or service? Learning Outcome 2.4, let's compare past variances between the forecast and actual sales performance and what happened in the past and why it happened in the past, so that we can get a good picture of what the variances might be in the future and almost pre-prepare ourselves for being able to explain variances, or preferably forecast them into what will happen. Because the last thing you want to do is have yet another set of unpredictable things happening. We need to learn and improve our forecasts over time, so actually what was unpredictable last year should be built into our predictions as much as they possibly can be for future years. Learning Outcome 2.5, evaluating the benefits of using IT and software systems for sales forecasting. Luckily, we are now in the modern age where actually the computers can do an awful lot of work for us. There is a downside to that in that the computers can do an awful lot of work for us, so we think we need to refine it further and further and further. There's a balance to strike in all of this sort of stuff. We can get over sophisticated with this and end up with paralysis by analysis, but actually it can be a fantastic tool to use software to enable us to forecast more accurately. So we'll have a quick look at how that happens, and you need to investigate that in your own organisation depending on what's available to you. Learning Outcome 2.6, look at measurement and control mechanisms within your own organisation to look at not only just reporting variances, but which variances should be reported. So in Learning Outcome 1, we looked at some variances actually they're not worth reporting on because they're either not significant enough or they are within the bounds of what one would normally expect. This is about, well, if they are outside those bands, if they are genuine variances, then what is the reporting mechanism that we need to have in place to make sure that the right people know about that variance on a timely basis? And then finally, learning outcome 2.7, let's identify the problems and issues that are completely outside of your control in terms of managing your sales forecast, things that we just can't guess, we can't predict, we can't look into our crystal ball for, and see if there's anything we can do about them, or at least be able to talk about the fact that that is what drove the variances between what we forecast and what actually happened. So, let's have a look at learning outcome 2.1 to start with, evaluating your own organisation's available sales information. It's really important for you to actually go out and understand, as a starting point, what exists within your own organisation. It's absolutely astonishing that different bits of organisations don't really understand particularly well what other bits of organisations have in terms of available data. And it's really important to build those networks within your organisations, as well as salespeople generally do outside the organisation, to really understand what is available, because you might be missing things that are relatively easy. There's somebody down the corridor within your same organisation, somebody in your head office that when you're popping in there, if you're based out in the field, go and talk to these people and find out what they've got available. Even better, they might be able to do some of the work for you. Some examples of the information that's available is we might have financial information from the finance department, so things like profitability or value sales figures, turnover figures and so on, margin information, net sales information, which is sales after certain levels of discount and so on. You might report on some or all of those, or maybe just one of those. You might have, if you're in a retail environment, EPOS information available. The Walmart's Asda retail link system is a phenomenal EPOS system. It's the one I was referring to earlier that has just incredible amounts of data on individual SKUs that are sold in individual stores, in individual minutes of the day and that sort of stuff. You can get incredible stuff if you've got a good EPOS system. And again, with developments in technology, just like that can help us build a forecast, it can also help us to report the data. So find out what tracking systems you've got for recording sales information. You might also have unit sales, might have market share information and so on. The list is potentially endless in terms of the sort of information that could possibly be available. Your job is to go out there and find out what actually is available from within your organisation. What can you go and get your hands on relatively easily that will enable you to help understand how forecasts are built, how they could be built, and therefore how we then report on them and understand variances and things in the future. So work out as part of your assignment, and you'll be challenged on this in your assignment, what is the currently available sales information? Do bear in mind what might be missing as well. It's often a really interesting question to look at. Not just what you've got, but what you could have or what you should have, and what might be possible in the future, what would be useful to you. Once you've done that, you can make a list of all of the sales-related data that exists and make sure that you understand all of them. From a financial perspective, it's really, really common to talk to salespeople about figures like margin and see that they don't really understand what margin is. Even finance people, in some respects, don't always understand what margin is either. The reality is there's way more than one margin figure. There are lots of different ways of calculating margin. There are differences between a markup margin and a sales margin. We can calculate all of these things in different ways. There is no such thing as saying this is the margin without explaining what particular margin it is you're talking about. That's just one example of making sure that you understand the numbers. Make sure that you, when you're reporting numbers, don't make it overly complicated. These huge spreadsheets exist in organisations now. You need to work out what the key ones are for you, for your sales forecast, for your understanding of your business, and focus on those. A lot of measures, a lot of KPIs are talked about in a very glib fashion, in a way that it just sort of brushes over the surface of, yeah, well, it's this and it's that. Do we actually understand what it means? That understanding can be hugely powerful and set you apart from others in your organisation, because you actually do know what you're talking about. And there are too many people who pretend to know what they're talking about and don't necessarily know. They're caught out by the odd question or two, and that can be very, very interesting. Learning outcome 2.2 is, once we've got all of this information and we make sure that we understand the terminology behind this information, is to make sure that we then actually think, well, what else is there apart from the core parts of sales information? Margins and value sales and volume sales and so on. We've got a wide range of other stuff. We've got company data, market data, and social data and so on. Company data can be basically anything that your organization produces, from financial stuff to shipment-related information to product quality-related information and so on. There's loads of stuff, not all of it directly relevant for sales forecasting. But if you take an example from a production point of view, it might actually be the case that production data will drive some of the variances in your actual sales versus forecast. If there are production issues, that could cause a difference because you can't supply something to a particular customer. Well, how often do those production issues occur? What is their frequency? What is their scale and so on? So that sort of company data could be really, really useful. From a market data point of view, sources can vary hugely, from really sophisticated IRI stuff that looks across the whole network of people within a particular geography and says this is how many people are buying this particular product and so on, and calculates market shares out of that information, through to really quite simple stuff in terms of finger in the air type activity. But it's important to get a good picture of what is going on in the market as a whole, as good a picture as you possibly can, bearing in mind your industry, so that you can start to reflect some of that in the forecast that you build. And then finally, looking at social data. We need to be aware of what is going on in the big wide world out there. And there's data that is available that might come into your organization, but you might need to bring it into your organization in some cases, that says, where is the world going? Where are people moving to? What is the direction of travel of society? Because that might have serious impacts on our forecasts. And if it sounds like a big thing only affecting the very long term, that could be the case. But actually, there are some social changes that affect things really, really quickly. Big changes. I'm going to talk about one of those a bit later on. So it's important to pick up stuff from all sorts of different areas. Don't just focus on what sales information have we got available to us. Again, just like with the available sales information, make a list of this, brainstorm it, think what else might happen, maybe mind map it out and that sort of thing. See what range of data sources you might have available to you. Pick a couple of main ones, and then as in the mind mapping process, branch out. What else could be available? How could we look into different things using different data sources? The more you do this, the better picture you're going to get. Avoid the temptation to overdo it and spend your entire life doing this, because sometimes we need to go out and sell things to people and manage the people who sell things for us. But if we can do this from time to time and just keep on top of it, it will enable us to get better quality forecasting in place for our organization. Learning outcome 2.3 is then about, well, how would our internal plans for what the organization is going to offer into the market in the future change our sales forecast? So year by year, in most industries, something changes. I was working with a business based across Europe producing some office equipment fairly recently. And one of the things that we talked about then is, what is the scale and speed of change in your particular industry? The initial response was, actually, it's a really slow-moving industry, not a lot changes. And you can tell that if you look around an office today versus an office 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, they're not that different. There are a few offices that have changed, but the majority of normal bog standard offices, the bulk of the market, has not shifted significantly. So they would say, well, actually, do we really need to change our forecast based on significant changes for next year and the year after? Well, maybe not in general terms, maybe not for the bulk of the business. But once we probed behind the surface, what we actually found is there are certain bits of their business that are changing really, really quite dramatically, particularly around changes to environmental legislation and so on, as well as getting the cool and trendy offices built. So some of that sort of stuff will change the fringes of your forecast. So even in a very static traditional industry, you need to look at things like new product development. What are you doing and what are your competitors doing in terms of bringing new products to the market? Look at your marketing approach. Do you have a cycle of marketing patterns that ties in with significant periods of the year, like Easter and Christmas and Mother's Day and Father's Day and Fireworks Day and all of those sort of things? Or do you have big pushes at certain times of the year? Have you got a big launch planned for the beginning of next year and so on? Make sure that's reflected in your sales forecast and you know where to get the information to help you build it into your sales forecast. What's your pricing strategy and what affects your pricing strategy? Have you got any changes next year? What will the impact of those changes be? And if you're not planning changes yourself, are there things that are in the pipeline that could force you to change your prices? What is your exposure to raw materials, for example, if you're in a manufacturing environment? Even if you're not in a manufacturing environment, if you're buying things in from another supplier organisation who is manufacturing, they might have raw materials impacts that are then passed on to you, that you then need to pass on to customers. So understanding the flow of pricing over a period of time is really important, and looking at what might change next year. It's very rare that things stay the same. Products and packaging, other areas. What changes are you making to the products that you're offering? Either the existing product and tweaking it and so on, or actually the NPD element of launching something completely new. And if you're changing packaging, what is the impact going to be on your sales forecast then? You could think, well, simplistically, we're going to improve our packaging, more people will want to buy it, it'll be great. But actually, if there's a cost-saving drive in your organisation, what you might find is that your packaging changes in such a way that you cut off certain customers. They might have been not particularly profitable ones. That might be a great thing to do for the organisation as a whole, but you need to build these sort of things into your forecast, as well as some of the unknowns and uncertainty around any of these sort of changes that happen. So it's really important to gather information from across your organisation about what's going to change. It would be awful to build a sales forecast that you had to explain variances on later when the actual sales performance came in. And the reason for the variance was somebody in another department in your organisation hadn't told you something. Your job, when you're building the forecast, is to go and find out that information in the first place and take that responsibility for doing so. Learning Outcome 2.4 is about comparing variances, and we went through this in an awful lot of detail in Learning Outcome 1, looking at which variances we need to explain. In 1.3, we looked at the differences and which differences we needed to explain, and we looked at whether, is it just the big ones we need to look at? Is it the ones that are outside the scope of what would be classed as a normal variance that we need to explain, and so on? You need to go and have a look at your historic data and look at the variances that you had to explain in the past, or that you should potentially have explained in the past. Look at which ones were the biggest. Look at the pattern of sales versus forecast. Is there a shape to it? Is there something that actually we could build into our prediction of the future to take away a lot of the variances that have happened in the past? Have a look at what drove the biggest variances and how predictable they might be. Have a look at why they weren't predicted in the first place. Because it may be they were completely and utterly unpredictable, or it may be, do you know what, our forecast wasn't quite sophisticated enough last time. And wouldn't it be great if we could build that sophistication into our forecast for next year? This information is going to be really, really useful for changing the way and improving the way that we run sales forecasts, so that we can get better at it and build more robust forecasts into the future. Learning Outcome 2.5 is about using IT and technology to do a lot of this work for us. Quick and dirty, back of fag packet type calculations. If you're as old as me, you'll remember doing this sort of stuff. They're great and they have their place, and actually, do you know what? They can be really useful. And that finger in the air can be a very powerful way of taking some of the qualitative data, the qualitative information that we all gather about our customers and the future of our business. It can be really useful for doing that. However, there is a huge benefit in managing more and more of this information using IT and software. Even if it's just Excel to produce graphs, to be able to identify the biggest variances and things like that, it can be really, really powerful to do. They can provide the information and they can help us to analyze it. They've got both the input side, the doing stuff bit in the middle, as well as the output side. And as long as we then express it clearly and have it in a usable way and make sure that the information goes in a way that's easy to manage and easy to track and so on, it can be fantastic. Be really careful about using bad systems for doing this sort of stuff, because you can actually end up using a lot more of your time, a lot more of your energy managing the system rather than managing what comes out of the system. But when you get it right, it can be wonderful. So be really conscious of making sure you understand what lies behind any IT systems, any software systems that you've got in your organisation to do this. And if you're building your own models, your own Excel spreadsheets and so on to be able to do this, then make sure you fully understand them and build them in a way that is easy and simple for you to use, but enables you to create as robust and accurate a forecast as possible. Make a note of all of the systems you have. This will be really important for your assignment for this learning outcome. Where is the data coming from? What is the source? How are you going to analyze it? And what are the different ways of analyzing it? And then from a reporting point of view, the output point of view, how are you going to report it in a way that is simple for you to use and for others to understand as well? Learning Outcome 2.6 is about the measurement and control mechanisms that are in place in your organisation to understand and report the variances that are in there. If you've done all this work around variances, it's really important to give that information to other people as well, because there are others in the organisation who will A, have insight to help you improve your forecast in the future, but B, they will also be able to help you understand and explain things and hopefully remove variances in the future, particularly if they're lack of information-based variances. So go ahead and identify the measurement and control systems that exist currently in your organisation to be able to provide information against these 5 specific questions. Who is responsible for the systems and measurement in your organisation of variances and sales reporting of forecast versus actuals? Who identifies and highlights the variances and how are they shared with the relevant people? Where does the data come from? And who turns that data into information through analysis? If you're in a really unfortunate position, all of those answers might be you, and if so, you've got a lot of work on your hands. But the chances are, even if it is all of you, there are other people who can help you with this. And it's important not to think about all of this forecasting thing as a sideline, as a little irritant in the pocket of the job that we carry around with us all the time. This is important and powerful stuff, as we covered in Learning Outcome 1. The final part of Learning Outcome 2, Learning Outcome 2.7, is to think about the areas that are outside of our control, the areas that we need to understand in enough detail to be able to understand how they impact actual performance versus forecast, and to help us really understand which bits we need to focus on and which bits, to be honest, we need to shrug our shoulders and say, do you know what, there's nothing we can do about this. We don't have a crystal ball, we can't predict the future. What we need to think about is what is outside of our control that we need to stop worrying about. And there are 3 ways of dividing this. Sometimes it might be outside of our personal control or our unit's control, but inside the control of other parts of the business. And that's where communication around forecast can be really important. It might be outside of our business's control, but other people could control it. And that might be competitors, it might be customers, it might be political situations and so on. It could be outside anyone's control. Some political stuff, but getting into social areas and so on, that actually, do you know what, nobody can do anything about. So if we have a look at these, controlled by others in our business, well, what sort of things might those be? Could be the marketing department, the finance department, the supply chain, IT systems, HR systems, and so on. We need to go and talk to these guys. We need to go and find out, because if they are making decisions and changing things within the business that will change the actual sales that we receive, wouldn't it be great if we could build that information into our forecast and get more accurate from the go? Controlled by people outside our business, but still controlled by people, might be things like competitor activity. What are our customers doing? New entrants coming into the market, new products coming in that could substitute for the product that we offer, and regulations coming in. This is harder than the stuff that is within our business, because then we just need to go and find the people and talk to them. We might not be able to go and talk to our competitors and customers in this level of detail. But the more of this we can do, the better. So go out and research and find out what is happening in the big wide world that is outside your own organisation, and work out what's happening from this point of view. In some ways, the most interesting, I found it the most interesting, but also the most difficult from a forecasting point of view, is the stuff that is outside our control completely and not controlled by anybody. Things like weather, the politics, conflict, natural disasters, social trends, and so on. If you're in the ice cream business, one of my favourites from this point of view, weather is absolutely critical. It changes it and nobody controls the weather, and it's really hard to predict as well. Very, very difficult area. Politics might be important. Big thing in the news at the moment, of course, is the change in the oil price. It's fluctuating all over the place. It's been collapsing. It seems to be creeping up a little bit right at the moment, looking at my watch today and filling up with fuel this morning. That's a political factor. It's driven by some conflict-related things, but actually it's a bit more political around the behaviour of some of the OPEC countries changing the supply of crude oil into the market, and doing that quite deliberately. Conflict is another. Conflict can change the prices of things right the way across the world. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine changed the price that UK farmers were paid for their wheat, because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and if wheat isn't coming out of the Ukraine, then actually there's far less supply onto the market, which drives prices up. So a war in one part of the world can dramatically change prices of things right the way across the other side of the world. Happens all the time, and oil falls into this area a huge amount, and will probably continue to do so for an awfully long time. Natural disasters can be another one. There's the unpronounceable Icelandic volcano that happened a few years ago, with storm clouds of ash, of volcanic ash being spewed everywhere, and it stopped people flying around, and it stopped things being delivered, and it changed what people could buy and sell and all of that sort of stuff for quite a few days, even into weeks. It threw a bit of chaos into markets, and we can't predict that, but these things happen. And then things like social trends. One of the big things that's happening from social trends point of view at the moment are what people are supposed to be eating and what are they allowed to be eating, and those sort of things. If you're in a market selling either healthy organic vegetables, or at the other extreme, something that's absolutely full of sugar and probably a lot more delicious and fun to eat, the social trend in one direction may have a significant impact over your business. Now, some of that might be predictable, but there are some quick and dirty social trends that happen that people just instantly turn off one thing. A classic example would be some scooters, some skateboard things that happened from last year. All of a sudden, those were incredibly popular. Everybody wanted one of these hoverboard things. A few accidents happen. Nobody wants one because it goes around on social media. It's dangerous. You shouldn't have one. And the market goes from one extreme to another. Not particularly predictable. So we need to be aware of all of this sort of stuff, but we can't really build it into a forecast, apart from in some sort of scenario planning basis. Again, something that we talked about in Learning Outcome 1. So look at your business, look at your industry, look at your trends, and see what factors exist that could influence your business. Both ones that that are controlled from within your business, but other bits outside of your particular business unit. Things that are influenced by people in your industry, but outside your business. And then thirdly, these sort of completely out of control or much, much broader influences over sales performance. Don't forget, of course, Porter's 5 Forces is a really nice model for looking at this. What are suppliers doing? What are customers doing? What are new entrants doing? What are substitutes doing? What are your competition doing? What's the basic rivalry in place in your organisation, in your industry? And how is that actually going to affect the actual performance of sales versus your forecast in the future? So that is a Learning Outcome 2 of Unit 503 of the Level 5 Diploma in Sales and Marketing. You now must head towards completion of your assignment. Those are the various learning outcomes that we've got. And the assignment combines Learning Outcomes 1 and Learning Outcomes 2. What you need to do is go ahead and produce a report on the efficiency of sales forecasting within your own organisation. This first task asks for a report into the effectiveness of sales forecasting within your organisation, or if you don't have a process within your organisation, you can use one that you're familiar with from another organisation. And you must include how variances are monitored and controlled within your ongoing sales forecast. Think about the timescales that that's done on, what the reporting systems and mechanisms are, who is involved in that, and so on. It must incorporate discussions on the types of forecasting possible, implications of not forecasting, of using ad hoc methods of forecasting, and how you manage variances over time within the organisation to create an ongoing forecast. A lot of organisations will revise forecasts as the year develops, dependent on what's actually happening out there in the world. So, there's more information available on Task 1 in your workbooks and so on. Go ahead. Go and understand what happens in your organisation, and good luck with getting that written. Thank you.